For his time, Rod Serling tested the limits of what was allowed on TV. In the post-McCarthyism era, he was heavily censored for challenging white supremacy and bigotry on air. His show held up a mirror to the ugliest parts of American society, and looking back, could only be described as the Twilight Zone. Although Men Against Fire aired 56 years after The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, they share the same themes of showing what happens to a group when they are under the spell of xenophobia, racism, and bigotry. I will be comparing the episodes Men Against Fire and The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Both episodes share themes of fear-mongering and scare tactics, and how people's paranoia can be used to control them. In both Men Against Fire and The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, the main characters show the dangers of fear-mongering. In both shows, main characters are disillusioned, extremely paranoid, and controlled by fear of the other. The main characters end up taking on the characteristics of the group that they have villainized, being the roaches and monsters respectively. The main characters are so overtaken by their irrational fears that they resort to violence. In The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, it first aired March 4th, 1960 and was directed by Ronald Winston and written by Rod Serling. In The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, a community becomes extremely paranoid, hypervigilant, and tears itself apart trying to identify the monsters which they believe are invading their street. It starts off when they lose power on their street, and at first they have a reasonable response, guessing that it may be from an electrical storm, and slowly it falls prey to paranoia and fear-mongering as they lose their ability of discernment. A kid mentions that he saw a ship, and it reminds him of what happened in his comic book. The people in the community become curious and want to hear what happens next. He tells them that in the comic book they sent down 4 aliens that look like people to integrate themselves into the community and hide in plain sight. This spurs paranoia, where people in the community on Maple Street begin to suspect each other of being aliens and being an invader in their community. Incidents as simple as someone's car not starting and then starting, or someone stargazing at night because they're insomniac, are used as evidence to indict their character and raise suspicion that they are strange or make them a suspect. When resident on Maple Street's car doesn't start and then suddenly starts, because his is the only car that works, they suspect him of being an alien. Then later on, another character is outed as being a stargazer, and he explains that he was out looking at the stars because he is an insomniac. But that's not a sufficient answer, and they begin to suspect him of being an alien because he was looking at the stars. In Men Against Fire, it takes place in the future and shows a soldier who is sent into combat to take out the roaches. For the first third of the show, we don't know what the roaches are or what they've done. We hear that they steal, they're dirty, they're untrustworthy, and they are unpredictable and violent. In Men Against Fire, we are following a soldier who is sent in to combat roaches, who are described as unpredictable, violent, and barbaric. And soldiers have special technology called mass, which is an implant that affects their vision. We come to find out that the mass implant alters their perception of roaches, who are really just civilians who are being persecuted and oppressed by the soldiers. As is common in xenophobia and racism, you see the more powerful group drawing a line in the sand and then vilifying anyone who's on the other side of it. So if you don't meet up to their standards, hold their same values or beliefs, they will ostracize you and oppress you, limiting your access to the same resources and institutions and condemning you to death simply by your mere existence. The language used to describe the roaches is identical of that used to describe immigrants, refugees, or aliens who are labeled as extremely violent, unpredictable rapists, drug lords, and, a plague upon society. Roaches or illegal immigrants, no one's illegal, that's just a term used to dehumanize them, just like roaches are dehumanized in this Black Mirror episode. The writer Charlie Brooker was inspired by SLA's book Men Against Fire and Dave Grossman's On Killing. It becomes much easier for soldiers to kill and dehumanize the roaches when what they see is an illusion. The mass implant that they have disconnects them from reality and dehumanizes and defigures the roaches to a point where they're unrecognizable and their very existence is a threat. The mass implant that the soldiers have in Men Against Fire allows them to pull the trigger with more ease. If your enemy doesn't look like you, then you don't empathize with them, and it becomes easier to end their lives. In Black Mirror's Men Against Fire, the soldiers have a mass implant, and what that does is dehumanize and disfigure their adversaries. But their adversaries are really in their head because they pose no direct threat to the soldiers. In the same way, xenophobia and racism creates an other that is, demonized and villainized to the point where it becomes very easy to kill them and not feel an ounce of remorse. The soldiers are trained not to empathize with the roaches and treat them as adversaries, just as police officers and U.S. soldiers are trained to villainize and dehumanize civilians, even if the civilians pose no threat. That is also why the American military is responsible for the most civilian deaths of any country around the world. When your enemy doesn't look like you and you are told that they share different values and beliefs, it becomes a lot easier to end their lives. Just as the soldiers in Men Against Fire are taught not to empathize with the roaches because they're repulsive, disgusting, ugly, and dangerous. It aired October 21st, 2016. So in America, during the Trump era, we saw an extreme rise in xenophobia, never mind that Obama actually deported more people than George Bush and provided more funding to ICE and border control. Now anyone within a 100-mile radius of a border, they can be subject to warrantless searches if they think there are refugees there. As in a lot of Black Mirror episodes, they integrate technology really well, and with the direction that militarization and technology are going in the 21st century, I think it's pretty realistic. The United States is the most violent country on earth. We spend the most taxpayer money on earth, and not even accounting for our military, we have police departments that are better funded than some countries' armies. So with the amount of money that's being invested in the militarized industrial complex, with the amount of money being invested in the militarized industrial complex, The things that Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and base systems come up with is the stuff of nightmares. And they are definitely responsible for causing not only refugee crises, but increasing the number of orphans around the world in Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Mozambique, Yemen, and countless other countries. U.S. soldiers and police officers go through similar training where they are told to disconnect themselves from the people on the other side of their gun. And when they view everyone as a suspect, everyone as a potential criminal or a potential target and an adversary, they can pull a trigger without second guessing it and with little forethought. You could especially see this in drone operators who, would carry out a drone strike as easily as they would send an email. When you're disconnected from your adversary, when you are trained not to empathize or view them as your equal, then you don't have to afford them the benefit of the doubt or basic human dignity, and therefore you commit war crimes, genocide, and mass murder, which American soldiers have done time and time again, except they don't have an implant, they just have propaganda that tells them every civilian, every person in their community outside of their police precinct is a potential criminal and a suspect.
2 men are in it. That's it. So when we fired the shot, it was like an L-shaped building, and the person ran from off the screen around into the door, and like it was a person. Like, I'm not going to say that it was a dog. I was told that it was a dog, but it was a person running from off the screen around and into the building.
But could it have been the high-value target?
No. It was too small to be a male, adult.
You suggesting to me it was a child?
Yes. I believe it was a child.
So you see this on the big close-up on your screen. Do you at that moment have the capacity, the ability within the system to divert the missile which has already been launched?
If there was more time, probably, but there was less than 6 seconds left on the clock.
So what did you do?
Maintain target. Like, I asked the pilot what that was, and he's like, it don't matter. Like, they didn't care. They didn't care at all. There was no sense of compassion or caring or understanding. It was, oh, that's a tragedy. We'll just cover it up. I don't think at the time I was able to think. I was so shocked. It wasn't until I just asked, what was that? And it wasn't until afterwards, after the missile hit, I was like, did we just kill a kid? Like, the shock. Like, there's no recoil. There's no anything to say that we've done a shot. It's just click, click, click.
We began this interview talking about that word accountability. I just wonder, after an incident like this, where the unexpected happens, the pull trigger signal is given, the missile goes off, and then you, responsible for the cameras, see what you believe to be a child right on target. What sort of post-strike investigation, accountability is there?
None. Really none. The only time that people got investigated was if they crashed an aircraft that I know of directly.